to know how to live the way God intended? Then this podcast series is tailor-made for you. David Taverner asks Bible expert Mike Beaumont why Jesus spoke about living God's way using parables. And Mike will sum up what this means for us today in just 3 words.
We're still in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, because there's a whole string of these parables, literally one after the other. I think these next couple are amongst my favourites, actually, funny enough, Mike. This first one is the parable of the treasure and then the parable of the pearl. So let me ask you, first of all, who is Jesus talking to?
Yeah, well, as you say, this collection of parables of the kingdom in Matthew 13, Jesus showing us the principles by which God's kingdom operates and how we can align ourselves with those principles if we want to get the best out of our life lived with Jesus. So the parables began by him teaching the crowd as they gather around him. He gets into a boat as a floating pulpit and pushes out a little so he can project his voice back to the crowds who are listening. But then halfway through, in verse 36, then he left the crowd and went into the house. Which house? Well, the house that's become his base in Capernaum. Peter's home becomes his base for his ministry over this period. And it's as he goes back to the house, presumably now sort of late in the day, he's been doing some teaching. He interprets the parable of the weeds, first of all, to the disciples, as we've seen in a previous episode, because they didn't quite grasp it, but then tells these 2 parables. Now, we've seen before, haven't we, how sometimes Jesus puts 2 parables together back to back as like a reinforcement of the message or giving one angle and then a slightly different one in some way. So here we've got 2 parables that very much reinforce one another, that very much bring home the same message. The first is about treasure. The second is about pearls. But very similar messages, though with 1 or 2 little tweaks of emphases that are slightly different, as we'll see. And given now, not to the crowd, as we've said, but when Jesus has got back to Peter's house. So, you know, their disciples are chilling there at Peter's home, probably waiting for the evening meal to be cooked. And Jesus carries on his teaching. He's not finished yet. He's still got more to tell them about the values of the kingdom and how it operates and how they need to line up with that if they're going to get the best out of life with him.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall, but I suppose in a sense we are a fly on the wall because we're actually hearing what he said.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the Gospels, isn't it? It gives us this sort of fly on the wall moment when we can look and see what's happening and sometimes see the things that were happening when the crowds weren't there, as this absolutely is the case.
And the fact that Jesus continues to want to help his students, his disciples, understand.
I love that. It's like Jesus never runs out of patience with teaching his disciples, reiterating the message, ensuring it's got in. After all, he knows he's only got these 3 years or so with them. They, of course, from their point of view, think they've got him forever for the next decades to come. But Jesus knows. He knows why he came into this world. So he knows he's got but a short time with them, relatively speaking. And it's like he takes every opportunity he can. By the way, there's a good model for discipleship. Take every opportunity you can with those that God gives to you and puts around you to share what's in your heart. Not in a sort of preachy looking down at them mode, but just taking opportunities. Whenever I've traveled for ministry over many decades, I've always taken one of the young guys in church with me to be an opportunity. Or if I've been with my wife, we might have taken a young couple with us. Why? Well, 1, I want to give them opportunity for ministry, but 2, it's such a great opportunity to rub shoulders and chat. And as you're traveling, so what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that's what happens so often with Jesus and his disciples.
And when he's with his disciples, that sort of inner circle, I suppose, if you like, does he sort of talk in a different language, in a sort of theological, technical language?
No, I think he still uses very much the same language, but sometimes he gives deeper insights into things. So as we're going to see here, he's still talking parable language, still using exactly the same thing that he's used with the crowds, but taking things a little bit deeper at times with them, as he is doing here.
And so, here we are in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, verse 44, where Jesus says to the disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So 2 pictures with a slightly different emphasis.
You can see great similarity, isn't it? It's about finding something that's valuable, selling all that you have to be able to get it. So the core message is definitely the same, but there are some slightly different emphases. Note as well with both of them, the kingdom of heaven is like the whole parable. The kingdom of heaven is not like treasure hidden in a field. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field that a man found and sold everything in order to get it. It's the whole parable again that is what the kingdom is like. So yeah, 2 parallel parables, but very similar, though with a slight different tweak and emphasis in each of them.
And in this first one then, we've got this man who wasn't sort of looking for treasure like a detectorist.
Yes, yeah. Interesting, isn't it? That's definitely the difference. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure in a field that a man found. So he stumbles on it. We'd say he found it by accident. Now, what on earth is he doing finding treasure in a field by accident? Well, perhaps this guy was a day labourer working on his master's field. Perhaps it was, a field of a relative or something. It certainly wasn't his at this point, but he's labouring away in the field and he's digging away when all of a sudden it clang, clang, and his spade hits something and he digs a bit deeper and he looks and he finds this treasure box.
Jackpot.
Yeah, absolutely. He's won the Saturday Lotto without a doubt in their terms. He opens it, sees what's inside. Wow, this is amazing. So what's the treasure doing there? Well, treasure was often buried as a safe place in the ancient world. That's why so much of it gets dug up today and we find it and the detectorists find it. Banks were very few and far between in the ancient world. So if you had something you wanted to keep safe, you put it in a box, you found a designated place, buried it deep in the ground, covered it up, patted it down. But of course, sometimes the treasure got forgotten. Why? Well, perhaps because the person had died. Perhaps there was no family. Perhaps they'd not told anyone. Perhaps the land had been invaded. And so this treasure sits there waiting to be found. And in this story, the guy's gone off to do his ordinary everyday work. He didn't wake up this morning feeling, I have a good feeling about today. He just got up, rubbed his eyes, thought, here we go again. Gone out to the fields and it started digging. And by accident, he stumbles upon this treasure in the field. Now, do you know what? Jesus already would have his disciples' interest. I mean, this is a great story. This really is the equivalent of he's won the Saturday Lotto. He's become a millionaire.
Especially Matthew, the former tax collector.
Oh, I'm sure he would have definitely perked up at this one, wouldn't he? And recorded it, therefore, in his gospel here. But here's the interesting thing in the story. The focus of the story is not what's in the box. The focus of the story is not the fabulous wealth that is to be found, though it's mentioned. The focus of the story is not what the man got, but what the man gave. What the man had to give in order to get the treasure. So what does he do? Well, in the story, he covers it up. I bet he, trod on the ground firm and hard to make sure no one knew that he'd been digging there. And then he has to go. And what does he do? In the story, he sells everything that he has, absolutely everything he has, so that he can then go back and buy that field, so that the treasure in the field is now lawfully his. He can go back, get it out and say, here it is. What is Jesus saying? He's saying that's what finding the kingdom of God is like. Once you have found it, and you may stumble across it, you may not even have been looking for God, looking for Jesus, but something happened in life and you suddenly stumbled across this truth and this teaching. When you find it, Jesus says, it's worth giving absolutely everything for. He sold all he had. This value of God's kingdom, this value of living life God's way and knowing that God is with you and for you and will be throughout eternity, and you'll be with him in eternity, but his presence and power start to be experienced right now. Once you've seen that, it's worth giving everything for. It's worth giving everything to follow Jesus. And not only is it worth giving everything for to get Jesus, I would say it's worth giving everything to keep Jesus. This is not just about give everything to start out your Christian life. This is, do you know what? If you want the best out of Jesus, you get the best when you take a posture of saying, Lord, it's all yours. I've made this decision right back at the beginning. I am not going to hold anything back. Now, Jesus did meet people in his life who weren't ready to make that decision. There's the story in the Gospels of the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and says, I want to follow you, Lord. Lord, I'm ready to go anywhere with you. And Jesus saw that for him, there was an issue to do with money. And so Jesus said to him, okay, yeah, you can, but first go and sell everything that you have and then come and follow me. And the text says, on hearing this, the young man went away very sad. Why? His money meant more to him than Jesus did. He certainly wasn't prepared to give up everything to follow. Now, for us, the issue may not be money. It's unlikely to be money for many of us. But what Jesus is saying here is, unless we're prepared to hand over everything, every aspect of our life, every attitude, every action, every decision, every future plan, unless we're ready to hand it all over to him, for him to be Lord of, then we will never be a true disciple, a full disciple. We'll never really enjoy the life of this kingdom. And this is not sort of a reluctant, yeah, well, all right then. Notice that the text said the man in his joy went and sold everything he had. He is so excited at this prospect of kingdom life with Jesus. He says, listen, I'm going to sell it all to follow him. This is worth giving everything for.
Do you know people who've done that?
Do I know people who've literally gone and sold everything they've ever had? No. But do I know people who've given up everything to follow Jesus? Yeah, absolutely. In terms of their plans and their desires and their ambitions. When I became a Christian at the age of 18, I had a very clear life plan set out before me. I knew what I wanted to be, the stages I was going to achieve to get there.
That you wanted to do.
That I wanted to do. And you know what? It was a good plan. Actually, I can tell you, it was a plan, first of all, to go to university, train to become a teacher, work my way up, become a headmaster, so I could make a significant difference in the life of a school. I've always really been a teacher at heart. But very early on, within my first year of being a Christian, I felt God start to say to me, that's not my plan for you. I want to call you to serve me, to be a pastor. As I understood it in those days, probably quite a narrow understanding of it at the time. And I had to make a decision at that point to give up everything in terms of my plans, what I had decided I wanted to do with my life. And for me, that would involve, well, doing my university degree and being a school teacher for a couple of years and then going to, by faith, living and trusting and going to seminary and doing a theology degree and becoming a pastor. And there were some real sacrifices for myself and for Liz, who'd become my wife in that journey as well. And it meant giving up on what we had planned for Liz. It meant giving up on her vision of how life was going to look for her. And, it costs at times. You have to weigh that. I so wanted to be a school teacher and a headmaster. It's not like wanting to be prime minister, and something big, but I felt I could make a difference. So it wasn't a bad choice, just wasn't the best choice. Wasn't God's choice. But I can honestly say I look back over the decades since I made that decision to give up everything to follow him. And it was tough. During my time at seminary, Liz and I lived by faith. Certainly for the first year there, we got no grants or help in any way. And we just had to call out to God. And on days when we had no money for food, we'd suddenly get a phone call saying, hey, would you like to come round for tea today? Or would you like to come and have dinner with us on Sunday? We saw miracle after miracle after miracle on a daily basis as we sought to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And it involved a change in my plans. And I had to give things up. There was a cost. But you know what? I now look back over the decades and think, my goodness, I'm glad I decided to make that cost, because I've visited more nations and had more adventures and experiences than I would ever have had if I'd gone my own way. Life has been far more fulfilled. Now listen, that's one little person, one story. I can repeat that with hundreds, thousands more of Christians who I've known who've made that same decision. Equally, I know the flip side. People have wanted to believe in Jesus and do believe in Jesus, but who've never made that step of selling everything. And so they've poddled on, as a sort of mediocre Christian in church and have turned up on Sunday and have been basically, decent people. But have they ever made an impact on anything for the kingdom? No, it sort of all passed them by. Really. So this is a decision we make once when we come into the beginning, and then it's a decision we make every day to be ready to give up everything to follow him. Why? Because we trust that the treasure that we've seen is worth far more than anything we ourselves could give or pay or give up.
And I'm very conscious that Jesus is saying these words, speaking this parable to his disciples, and they've started to give up things, fishing, tax collecting, but they haven't given up everything completely forever.
No, and it's interesting that after the resurrection, Peter and some of the disciples would go back to fishing. So there was still clearly the fishing business there, and they sort of put it to one side, but not exactly abandon the whole thing. Yeah, of course, the point would come where Peter would stop fishing for fish and totally give his life to fishing for men. There would be a point when the Apostle Paul would stop being the young professional rabbi that he had been and become a Christian missionary who would literally live by faith and have to depend on the support of the churches as he went out into mission. So there was a process for them. It didn't happen overnight. And I think that, there can be a process for us. But if we have truly seen what Jesus has to offer, if we have seen the excitement and potential of life in God's kingdom, a life of daily trusting God and seeing what doors he will open today and what adventures we will open up, it is worth giving everything for.
Of these two parables, the first time, as you said, this person happens to accidentally come across the treasure. It seems like in this second parable, the pearl of great price, that he was actually looking for something.
Yeah, and I think Jesus is doing that deliberately, because I think that is a picture of how people come into God's kingdom and come into the church. So in the second one, you're quite right. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. Now, we know that in those days there were merchants who traded in pearls, and they would travel far and wide looking for pearls of great value to be able to buy and then to sell it. It's interesting, the Greek word here, literally a merchant, the Greek word means someone who goes on a ship as a passenger, is literally what it means. And from that, it came to mean a professional traveller, a professional merchant who travelled as, well, what we would call today a wholesaler, wholesale dealer. So this is a professional wholesaler whose whole life is dedicated to hunting out the very best pearls that he can find. Where did pearls come from in those days? Well, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean were three of the most popular places. So if you were going to be a successful pearl trader, you would be traveling between all those, hunting them, and then obviously wanting to trade them. And really precious pearls in those days, good quality, large size pearls, would be worth the equivalent of tens of millions today.
Wow.
So this guy is probably a very wealthy guy indeed. And he's out hunting. And one day he finds the pearl. Oh my goodness, he has seen some pearls in his life as a wholesaler. But one day he finds the pearl. He finds one of great value. He finds one beyond anything he's ever seen before. So what does he do? He went away and, sold everything he had and bought it. So there's the same emphasis again. To get this very precious pearl, he has to sell everything. So we've got exactly the same message as the first one. The kingdom of God is worth giving everything for. But you're right, there's a contrast. In the first one, the first person finds it by accident. In the second one, the person is hunting for it. Well, isn't that how it often is still today? There are some people who suddenly get a stirring and a longing to start digging and finding out about God and wanting to know it. There's a whole generation Z at the moment getting stirred to want to find out about God. I'm mentoring a young man back in my home church who literally woke up one morning from a totally non-Christian background. And he woke up one morning thinking, I need to find out about God. As simple as that. How do I find out about God? Well, I better get a Bible and I better find a church. How do I find a church? Well, he does what that generation does. Went online, looked for churches. First one he went to, he found was closed. He thought, I got that wrong, but he didn't give up. He thought, okay, where's another one? Oh, there's one round the corner from where I live, which happened to be our church. And he turned up at the door and said to our guy on the door, who's an amazing leader of the welcome team, learns people's names, looks out for newcomers. And he went to him and said, is this where I come to find out about God? And the guy said, yep, you're in the right place. Let me introduce you to some of the other young people and to our youth leader. And he set off on a journey of finding God, and he's found him and he's passionately pursuing him and wants to give everything. So there are some people who really are searching for God. There are others who almost find God by accident. The senior pastor that I worked with in my semi-retirement became a Christian under my ministry many years ago while he was still a medical student. And he got dragged along to our home one Sunday by his flatmate, one of a number of flatmates that shared a house. And one of them was a Christian. He dragged him along to our church on the basis that if you come to church, the pastor and his wife give a lovely lunch afterwards for students. So he came along not for God, but for lunch. Simple as that.
He wasn't looking for God.
No, not at all. I mean, I think God was at work in his life because he was really unhappy with life as it was, but he wasn't looking for God. Actually, he was utterly anti-God. He made the life of this Christian with whom he shared the flat sheer hell. He actually said to him, I'll get you out of this house if it's the last thing that I do. So that was his posture. And he came to lunch unexpectedly one day and we were chatting at the table and I was asking all the students about, so where were they at and when did they become a Christian? I said to this guy, hey, so when did you become a Christian then? He said, oh, I'm not a Christian. And I said, oh, sorry, not trying to corner you. He said, no. And suddenly, and I don't think he was aware he was even doing it, suddenly he poured out his heart about what a mess he was in. And I said, well, I think you need God, don't you? And he said, I don't know if I believe in God. And I said, well, could you reach out to God and say, God, if you were there, could you show yourself to me? And he said, yeah, I could say that. And I said, well, if you're going to do that, you need to read a gospel. You need to read the story of Jesus. Recommended reading John to him. And that night he ended up going home, reading John. Long story short, he had an encounter with Jesus unexpectedly there in his room. So he'd not been looking, but he stumbled upon treasure that day. He had not woken up that morning thinking, I need God, like the first young man had. So still today, people come into the kingdom in different ways. But whether you come to it, as it were, by accident or because you're hunting for something, the challenge is still the same. To get into this kingdom and to get on in this kingdom will cost you everything. And that sounds scary, but honestly, it is worth it, because this is the most exciting adventure there is in life.
I'm thinking of those disciples who hadn't really been looking for God, thinking of Matthew and Simon and John. Jesus just happened to come across them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Matthew got up that morning with one goal in mind, and that was to collect his taxes for Rome and take his cut that day. Peter got up one day simply with one thing in mind, to go fishing. And yet Jesus broke into their lives. Now, maybe the healing of Peter's mother-in-law was one of the steps on the journey that Peter had needed, that broke into his life into some powerful way. And very often the picture we get in the Gospels is, and Jesus called them and they came straight away. But I'm sure there was a backstory to all of this. And I think the healing of Peter's mother-in-law was absolutely part of the backstory for him. Probably the ostracization that Matthew had experienced from Jews, the sheer hatred from them for this collaborator with Rome, no doubt was playing its part in that internal angst that he was experiencing. But Jesus breaks in unexpectedly while they're doing their ordinary, everyday stuff. And to these two, Jesus also will give the challenge of, give it all up for me. And they did, and we're still reading about them and their adventures today.
The thing is, nowadays, there are so many demands on our time and our money and our relationships. Surely we can't give everything to Jesus.
Well, sorry, but he says we have to, and it's the only way in. This is not saying that today we have to sell absolutely every asset we have, hand it over to the church and live like a pauper and trust that God may call some individuals to do that. This is about heart attitude. This is about, so who henceforth looks after your money? Who henceforth decides what you do with your money? Who henceforth decides what you do with your time? Who henceforth decides how you run your family? This is about heart posture. It's not that Jesus wants to rob every penny of our bank. It's about who's the deciding influencer now in this area of life. Is it you or is it me? If it stays you, I can tell you what you'll do with your money. You'll keep it for you and yours. If you say it's me, I'll tell you what will happen. I'll tell you to start giving something away. Actually, 10% of it is a really good start and a test of your heart. And you know what will happen? At that point, you've got a choice. Because you either are going to say, yes, Jesus, and do it, trusting that he's got some purpose behind that, or you'll cling on to what you've got. And you'll keep what you've got, but that's all you'll keep. And you'll not see the excitement. If I just take money and giving as an example, I happened to become a Christian among a bunch of people who believed in tithing and taught it from the beginning. So for me, giving 10% of my income has never been an issue. I always just thought, well, that's part of being a Christian, isn't it? So it's never been a big issue for me, like it can be for some. And here's the thing about tithing. You give 10% away. Hey, guess what? Maths says you've only now got 90% left.
Yeah.
But my 90% still needs to pay for the 100% that I had planned beforehand. In fact, the 105% that I had planned beforehand. But this is where the miracle of God's impossible mathematics comes in. Because with God, 9/10 goes further than 10/10. But you never discover that unless you give them the 1/10 away first. And when you do, you find that God has a way of stretching your money or bringing things in from surprising places. When my kids were growing up, Liz would come home and say, hey, you'll never guess what? While I was out shopping today, I saw this on offer for £1. God has an amazing way of giving back to those who trust in him. Now, that's just an example with money that I chose, but it's everything in life. Our time, our vision, our opportunities, our plans, our family life, how we run things. You know, when we are ready to give it all over to Jesus and say, basically we're saying, you are in charge. How do you want me to handle this? That's when the exciting adventure begins. So the thrust of these two back-to-back parables is very simple. If you want the most fulfilling, exciting adventure in life today, then simply give it all. And if you're not feeling like you're living a fulfilled Christian life at the moment, I would challenge you, is it because there's some area of your life where you're holding back and you're not prepared to give it all, or where you're not prepared to say, Jesus, you can come into that area? Hey, I'm going to give you a challenge today. Go on, I dare you. Step out, give it all.
Bible expert Mike Beaumont explaining the parables of Jesus to David Taverner. Bible Parables in 30 Minutes is just one of a series of podcasts from Mike and David that help to make sense of the Bible, some of them recorded on location in the Holy Land and beyond. You can check them all out on the easy-to-use app UCB Player or wherever you listen to your podcasts.